for other recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Albers, Chairman. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Recognize the senator from the 29th to speak to the bill.
Times we do it with tongue and not quite understanding what the motive of the legislation is that we present. And we spent probably 3 hours the first day just explaining the difference between a jail and a prison. And a jail is where people are detained. People have not been convicted of anything. They're being held there to await the due process to determine if they're guilty or innocent and if they're going to go to prison or not, or if they're going to go home. Prison is where people go after they have been adjudicated guilty by their peers. And we have certain obligations within prison to take care of these individuals. Prisons are required to have health care contracts. They're required to have health care contracts that involve the physical health of the individuals, the mental health of the individuals, the dental health of the individuals, so forth and so on. But there are limitations to what we should be required to do. And what Senate Bill 185 does is lays out those differences when it comes to certain type of gender assignment surgeries. The meat of the bill, the concern of the bill, is on the last page, page 4. Starts actually, on line 66. Except as otherwise provided for in paragraph 2 of this subsection, no state funds or resources shall be used for the following treatments for state inmates. State inmate is defined on line 15. And these procedures are sex reassignment surgeries or any other surgical procedures that are performed for the purpose of altering primary or secondary sexual characteristics. Hormone replacement therapies and cosmetic procedures or prosthetics intended to alter the appearance of primary or secondary sexual characteristics. An important part is on line 73. The board shall adopt rules and regulations regarding the procedures and therapies prohibited by this subsection, which shall provide for the following limited instances in which the treatments set forth in paragraph 1 of this subsection shall be authorized. Treatments for medical conditions where such treatments are considered medically necessary, provided that such condition is not gender dysphoria or the purpose of such treatment is not for sex reassignment. Treatments for individuals born with a medically verifiable disorder of sex development, including individuals born with ambiguous genitalia or chromosomal abnormalities resulting in ambiguity regarding the individual's biological sex. Treatment for individuals with partial androgen insensitivity syndrome and hormone replacement therapy treatment for state inmates who are being treated with such therapy prior to the effective date of this act, provided that the provision of such therapy is solely for the purpose of transitioning off such therapy. It's really simple. If somebody comes into the Georgia Department of Corrections and they have gender dysphoria, then they will receive the psychological therapy that they have been receiving before, or if they have not been receiving it, they will have the opportunity to meet with therapists. Because understand, gender dysphoria is mentioned for the first time in the DSM-5 and for the second time in the DSM-5-TR. And it is classified as a disorder. And it is very clear as to what it is. And from a physical standpoint, when somebody comes in with a physical condition, they're required to receive the same type of medical care equal to or better than the community around them outside the wire. When they come in with a mental health issue and a disorder, they are also required to receive help to deal with that disorder. But that disorder, that help, which if you read conditions surrounding gender dysphoria, there's several other issues that can be displayed. It does not involve surgery. We had a very robust committee meeting about this. Several recent cases were brought forward. Something that we always hear is we're addressing a problem that is not a problem. Well, in this case, that is not true. There have been 3 cases filed against the Georgia Department of Corrections. And in looking at those 3 cases, we found a gap within the Georgia Department of Corrections. That gap being that they had no policy against these types of procedures. So, to solve that problem, this legislation was written, rewritten, and is being offered up to you today. People came to the committee meeting and said this will open up more opportunity for individuals to sue. And my response to that is I am fine with that. Every piece of legislation that comes out of this building is subject to being challenged in court. We say it many times. You can write the best piece of legislation you want, but until it is evaluated and pressure tested by a man or a woman in a black robe, then you really don't know how good the legislation is. There will be people to say, well, I have this expertise, I have that expertise, so I know. Well, I dare say that we have all been challenged in court on times when we thought we were going to win and we didn't, and in times where we weren't sure if we were going to win and we did. I respect all of those who challenge the legislation. This thing has been written incredibly narrow, and please understand, this is within the Department of Corrections. Every single thing that occurs within the Georgia Department of Corrections is paid for by taxpayer dollars. This legislation is necessary. The individuals who are in Georgia Department of Corrections who suffer from anything, whether it be gender dysphoria, whether it be depression, whether it be schizophrenia, or any other mental health issue, and to use a word from the DSM-5-TR, disorder, they are being treated. And so all this does, very narrowly, it says that we will not do surgery to change someone's sex. And with that, Mr. President, I'll yield for questions or yield the well.
A couple questions, Senator. I recognize the senator from the 10th.
Thank you, Mr. President. The senator yield.
The senator yields for a few questions from my friend, and then I'll yield for whoever else has a question.
So what does that mean? Do I get 1, 2, or 3 questions asked?
We'll make that determination. I just don't want, and with all due respect, you and I are good friends, but I don't want anybody to take up the vast majority of the time when I know there are other questions from the most likely from the same party, and I want to give everybody a fair chance. So
that's fair.
I yield to my friend from the 10th.
I won't do it. I only have about 3 or 4 questions, if that, Senator. You mentioned when you were discussing this bill that there are no known cases of any surgeries having been performed in our Department of Corrections. Is that correct?
Restate your question. I know of what?
You mentioned while you were speaking that you knew of no known cases where anything in this bill, any of these surgeries had ever been performed in our Department of Corrections.
Currently, there are 3 lawsuits in the Georgia Department of Corrections that I'm aware of, and my understanding is those are lawsuits and no surgical procedures have taken place within those cases.
Can you expand on those lawsuits? Are those lawsuits trying to get inmates to have the surgery or Department of
Yes,
Corrections to provide?
My understanding, it's limited because these are ongoing lawsuits, and I've had the opportunity to talk to individuals involved on the judiciary side, and so the information you can get is very limited in this case. So there are 2 cases involving individuals who were, my understanding, the information I have, 2 individuals who were born male, who are attempting to transition to female, and 1 individual who was born female is attempting to transition to male.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Yield?
I do.
Senator, are there any laws or anything on the books that would even require DOC under those circumstances to provide these surgeries?
No, but what the gap I spoke of, the fracture that we found in the system, as I know you understand as a businessman, just if you don't have a policy against something, that does not prevent somebody from challenging that as by claiming that the fact you do not have a policy would allow that type of behavior to happen.
Senator, further yield?
I do.
Senator, does it make sense to have a policy for something that really doesn't exist?
Yes, sir. It does make sense. I think what we look at, and I really do appreciate the question. What we have found is that a lot of times the retort for when you see the tsunami coming, a lot of people want to wait till it hits the shore to start sandbagging and evacuating everybody and doing what you need to do. I think if you look at the temperature that not only are we experiencing here in the United States, and obviously by these 3 lawsuits, these things, people are attempting to do this, then it is the responsibility of this body and the body across the way to make sure we are prepared for what comes down the road. Because as someone who understands crisis management and other things, you don't wait. And I think you just alluded to the fact that you and I agree there are 3 cases occurring, so it is here. So our job is to be good stewards of our state, to be good stewards of the Georgia Department of Corrections. We put policies into place that we feel are best to not only protect those housed in the Georgia Department of Corrections, but to protect the state, which is responsible for the Georgia Department of Corrections.
Senator, thank you for responding, but let me correct one thing. I do not agree with you. I've not heard of any cases. I've spoken to Commissioner Oliver. I am not aware of anywhere in the system, any time in the history of Department of Corrections, of this kind of surgery happening. Senator, thank you for your response.
But here's what I'll tell you, and I'm sorry that you don't know, but trust me on this, there are 3 cases.
I recognize the senator from the 41st.
Thank you. Senator, do you yield?
I do.
Senator, you spoke about this bill being about prohibiting people from being able to have surgeries, but isn't it true that this bill also makes it so that people who are incarcerated cannot have hormone replacement therapy?
If the attempt of the hormone therapy replacement is for gender transfer, yes, that is true.
So, Senator, do you further yield?
I do.
Can you explain to me why you are opposed to people having access to a very low-cost medication that would allow them to continue the therapies that they've been receiving?
First of all, the cost has nothing to do with it. The cost has, if we open up the door for small opportunities to move into the area dealing with gender dysphoria, then easily could it be interpreted by any court or others that the door should be pushed completely open, therefore exposing us to surgeries, gender reassignment, and things of that nature.
Do you further yield?
I will yield for one more question.
Isn't it true that you began your statement by saying that gender dysphoria does deserve, it's a disorder in the DSM and therefore should be treated And is it not true that hormone replacement therapy is a treatment for gender dysphoria?
It is one treatment for gender dysphoria, but based on policies and procedures that will be put in place by the board after this legislation passes, I think that probably most likely will not be, but there are other treatments available, and I would encourage you to look into that, which I would be surprised if the senator had not already. And I tell you what, Mr. President, I'll take one more question if there are any.
You have no more questions, Senator.
Thank you. I will yield the well.
Secretary, read the amendment.
Mr. President, Senator Parent of the 44th offers the following amendment number 1 to amend Senate Bill 185 by replacing lines 84 and 85 with inserting with such therapy prior to the effective date of this act. And that completes the order, Mr. President.
Senator, would you like to speak on behalf of the amendment? Recognize Senator from the 44th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I've struggled over this legislation. For all the years that I've served as a state senator and the 2 years that I served in the House, I have always been committed to ensuring the dignity, humanity, and equality of all Georgians, especially the LGBTQ plus community who have been under near constant attack, certainly this session and many sessions before this one. I feel like we've done more bills this session picking on transgender folks than we've done anything else. And isn't that a shame when it's not a priority of Georgians that we pick on transgender folks? They want to know what we're doing about the cost of housing, among many other topics that we don't seem to be addressing. Perhaps we're trying to distract from our low state minimum wage, our pathetically low state minimum wage, by throwing bill after bill attacking transgender folks onto the wall. But we also need to consider the public's priorities. And on the one hand, like the majority of my constituents and most Georgians, I don't believe that taxpayers should be responsible for funding the surgeries outlined in lines 68 through 69 and 71 through 72, including gender-affirming surgeries, cosmetic procedures, or prosthetics. But on the other hand, I believe that denying transgender prisoners access to gender-affirming hormones that they are already taking, and in some cases may have been taking for years, is cruel and unnecessary. And I don't agree with the author. I don't think that allowing people to remain on hormones says anything about whether or not the state should be funding surgeries. Those are two very different things. Therefore, I rise to offer Amendment 1. For many transgender individuals, hormone therapy is a necessary medical treatment, and it's recognized as such by major medical organizations such as the AMA and the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Forcing someone abruptly, or after a short period of weaning, to stop taking these medications while incarcerated can and will cause severe physical and psychological distress. And it's unnecessary, and it's harmful, and it's medically neglectful, because the treatment is not expensive, and it's not difficult to administer. There are a number of courts increasingly ruling that denying necessary medical care of this sort constitutes a deliberate indifference to serious medical needs. And beyond the medical risks, a policy that cuts off hormones that an individual may have been on for years exposes transgender prisoners to risks of increased violence and discrimination. We know that transgender inmates already face higher rates of abuse in prison, and the withdrawal of hormones can increase that vulnerability by forcing unwanted physical changes that can heighten the risk of abuse. If we allow, which I believe is the humane thing to do, allow transgender prisoners to continue this necessary hormone therapy, our prison system will uphold medical ethics, legal standards, and the fundamental principle that all people deserve humane treatment. So because of this, I urge your support for Amendment 1. If it's adopted, I believe that SB 185 would offer a more balanced policy. As I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, however, I don't believe that taxpayers should be required to pay for surgeries, gender-affirming surgeries, for incarcerated individuals. So I urge your support for Amendment 1, but I will be voting yes on the bill. In closing, please vote for Amendment 1 because cutting off hormone therapy does not advance a legitimate state interest of any sort for incarcerated individuals, denying incarcerated individuals hormones that they've been on for many years, and beyond not advancing any kind of legitimate state purpose, it's just cruel. So, Mr. President, I'm happy to answer questions, and if not, I will yield the well.
You have no questions, Senator.
Thank you. I yield the well, and I urge your support for Amendment 1.
Recognize the senator from the 9th.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today just to express my disdain with the way this body is prioritizing certain legislation, and we see this pattern. It's been coming up all session long. This bill is taking a non-issue that affects an extremely small amount of people and wasting legislative time. I believe this is the, fourth or fifth trans bill we've seen this session? All because my colleagues on the right need a political target. We get it. You hate trans people. That is the message that we get loud and clear out of the 4 or 5 pieces of legislation that you keep harping on throughout this session. You hate trans people and you just want to make their life harder. And this is the target that you chose. A vulnerable group of people that don't have a lot of money or power to fight back. But this is your target. It's despicable. The amount of bills we've seen on trans is we got it the first time. We've seen no bills to address out-of-control gun violence, a problem in the state right now and across our country. We've seen no bills about expanding health care, to give health care access to hundreds and thousands of people. We've seen no bills to expand housing affordability, a key issue that's in all of our districts. I've seen no bills to really make our economy better. And in light of the Trump administration, economists are already sounding the alarm that Trump administration policies are steering the American economy in a deep recession. That's going to skyrocket inflation, stifle business growth, and it is predicted that we are going to be in a recession higher than the Great Recession that we've had in the past. But by all means, let's keep dealing with trans issues while people are losing their jobs, while they don't have homes, while our kids can't read, while we're stifling funding and education. Let's just keep dealing with trans issues. Because it's gonna save the state so much money. I just want to note that Democratic-sponsored bills have received very little hearings. The majority here wants us to play along, and they're calling some of my colleagues to play along with their game here. But they won't give us a seat at the table for important legislation that we should be dealing with that actually helps Georgians. No matter what any of us say, this bill is going through. It's going to go through. It's going to pass. Conditions in our state prisons are currently at horrific levels, really unconstitutional levels. The living conditions in our prisons are at horrific levels. You know, it's our job to take care of humanity, and, you know, I get that we want to keep harping on trans bills, but I think there's something missing here in the humanity chip. Or, you know, how each of you views humanity and how you're supposed to love people and how you're supposed to take care of people. This is unserious work that isn't helping a single person in our state. Like almost other contentious bills that have come through, SB 185 is a sad, frivolous waste of time when we have so many other problems to address. Our constituents deserve better, our states deserve better, and they deserve better than these cheap political stunts because it polls well. With that, Mr. President, I yield well.
Thank you, Senator. Recognize the senator from the 14th.
Thank you, Mr. President. The mood in here is weird, right? I've said that before. A lot of people in the ante room, quiet. We've just got to get through this. It's painful. It's painful because y'all feel like you have to do these bills, and I know my colleagues have said, how many of these are we going to do? I've got more specific questions about the how many are we going to do part. I'm sort of curious, like, have you figured out the mailer yet? Like, how many bullet points? Because there is the rule of threes, right? So, like, it does make sense to stop at 3 anti-trans bills. You already have the sports one you can do, and then you did the state health benefit plan, and you already did puberty blockers. So from a rule of threes standpoint, you've already got your mail. A lot of consultants will tell you that the smaller that the font gets on a mailer, the less likelihood that the voters are going to read it. And so, you know, one aspect of this that y'all probably need to think about is if you do like 4, 5, 6 of the bills, you start to get, you know, where you get the back and forth email with your consultant where you're like, hey, I think there's too much text. Let's just drop puberty blockers. I think we should just do, the state health benefit one is good because it's like taxpayer money. Let's do that one, and let's do sports, because obviously sports is the best one we have. And then you argue over, well, let's just do one that's dedicated to sports, because we'll do a mail program that's got 10 to 15 mailers, so we can save some of the later ones for like the gnarlier stuff like surgeries. And then, you know, eventually, once our mail program's complete, we will have convinced the voting public that we've protected Georgia from 3 people. 3 people. Y'all know Senator Tommy Tuberville from Alabama? He had a quote, this was on Fox recently, I just saw this on social media. I'm going to quote Tuberville, and please, if y'all cut this, like if you splice this clip, please add the context that this is Tommy Tuberville's quote. But he goes, we're getting to a point now where women and girls sports are getting ready to be extinct. Because already in states across this country, we have high school teams that are made up of totally boys participating against girls. I mean, it's like the fear toxin I talked about a minute ago, am I right? We heard the word tsunami in the author's opening presentation. just a wave of trans people running scared on an island away from all the trans people because the wave is 50 feet high of just trans people. Did you ever expect when you ran for office as a law and order, fiscal conservative, that the way you would win re-election or election to a higher office in 2026 would be to pass like 6 bills that target a tiny fraction of people, and to come up here all serious and be like, we care so much about girls' sports? Do you want to hear how many jokes I've heard about women's sports from people who you wouldn't expect to be overtly sexist over the last 10, 15 years? The differential in pay being justified, the fact that the arenas don't get packed out, but all of a sudden we care about girls' sports. Or taxpayer money, we hear that a lot. Let's talk about the $4.1 million that the AJC found that Georgia's already spent on settlements and defense because of the lack of care that we're already providing. Like, at some point, I get that, when you get in the well, by playing along with the idea that these bills have merit individually, we are covering up what's actually happened. It's very, very simple. There is a vulnerable group of people who don't have a lot of political power. There have been a couple trial balloons on electoral success by beating up on them with bills, and now we're off to the races. Okay, if I did the legal history for you right now and said, oh, well, this court ruled this, you guys would be like, yawn, check your phone. Because you know it's unconstitutional. Like, if I were to quote a 2011 Court of Appeals opinion where, the courts start waking up to the reality of the Eighth Amendment problem, the Eighth Amendment being the one that says no cruel and unusual punishment, i.e. you can't be denied medical care while you're incarcerated because you don't have the means to go get your own care. You're stuck. So the state has to provide your health care, right? And the study committee in question was the safety and welfare of all individuals in the Georgia Department of Corrections, and yet this bill just exempts medical care for one group of those individuals. So I guess not all. Look, to think that this is not medically required, that this is not a constitutional issue, you've basically got to think that the anguish that people experience when they have gender dysphoria just doesn't exist, or that it doesn't matter. What I'm going to ask all of you to do if you vote yes is decide which of those two things you think about the anguish that comes from gender dysphoria. Is it that it doesn't exist, or is it that it doesn't matter enough? Because let me tell you, the only bill that has come through this chamber this year that would have a prayer of actually banning surgeries or whatever the scare word is belongs to the senator back there. I can't see the number, from Athens. It was a resolution to open up the United States Constitution and change it. That would have been the only legislative vehicle available to this body to actually get rid of hormone therapy, surgeries, and any other gender-affirming care that is necessary. Part of the problem, and I talk about these doors a lot, blocking us to the lived experience. Can you imagine, and I'm being dead serious, can you imagine what it's like to be so out of touch with your own body that you attempt auto-castration? Think about that. To be so out of touch with your own body, so in anguish over the feeling of disconnect that you have with your own body, that you attempt to castrate yourself. Now, the only times that surgeries have happened after they've been litigated, because it's bad enough without a policy banning them, it takes decades of court and litigation for the people who are attempting over and over and over again to castrate themselves to get a surgery. So the whatever the tsunami of surgeries is, there are already decades of legal roadblocks for the people who get that, let alone what the senator from 44th was talking about with regard to hormone therapy, which is a totally ordinary. Do you know that hormone therapy has been in use in the U.S. since the 1940s? For kids, by the way. Kids. No medical diagnosis, kids. Why? Because boys and girls didn't match up to the gender stereotypes about how tall or short they were supposed to be. This is real. You can go look this up. But when did we start caring all of a sudden about hormone therapy for kids and how irreversible and life-changing it was? When doctors and families decided in the privacy of their own space to start using those therapies for any different purpose except for gender stereotypes. When the culture and the social context changed, that's when all of a sudden protecting kids, protecting girls' sports, all of these salute the flag but exclusionary policies started to emerge. So don't get it twisted. None of this is new. Gender dysphoria is not new. Hormone therapy is not new. Corrective surgeries are not even new. What is new is that as transgender people have started to find each other, have started to assert their voices more loudly, as the science has improved and the medicine has become available so that people can get ordinary health care just like anybody else would expect, as they have developed a sense of confidence and strength in being part of public life, the reactionary majority is saying, not so fast. Don't run when you should be walking. In fact, don't even walk, sit down. In fact, don't even sit down, don't exist. So like when we use words like erase and eradicate from the well, we are talking about what is ultimately a reactionary impulse to try to deny these people the right to live their truth. And in the meantime, and under this bill, they're incarcerated, in some cases harming themselves tragically. So look, if you don't think this stuff is real or that it matters, that is up to you. But don't go to your districts and say we're saving taxpayer money when those people sue and we pay out for defense and settlements a multiple of what we would have paid just to give those folks health care. I would still go with 3 bullet points for the mailers because I do think Rule of Threes makes the most sense. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
Recognize the senator from the 22nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in opposition to this particular legislation. First, it's kind of important to understand what the bill is really not about. It's actually about 3 things, but surgery is really one of the bottom areas because it's so difficult to actually get, whether there are 3 pending cases or not. One of the first seminal cases that ever took place as far as surgeries are concerned actually took 27 years before the person actually was able to get their surgery because there's a lot of stuff that you have to actually show before you can actually do it. They filed for it in 1992. It wouldn't be until 2021 that they actually finally were able to receive their surgery. And the same actually would probably apply in these cases too, because it's not as though you can just say, I want to have surgery. It takes a lot to actually get to that point. So whether you file in cases or not is irrelevant. Same with this person actually filed a case and took 27 years before they actually were able to get it. The real aspect of this case is dealing with the hormone therapy and also, of course, the other cosmetics, which is in here in this particular bill. And the thing about this particular bill, looking at lines 73 through 76, is it really doesn't outlaw, as which has been mentioned, hormone therapies or cosmetic procedure prosthetics. It just outlaws it for persons who are suffering gender dysphoria, which obviously is completely unconstitutional, equal protection violation, because the simple fact of the matter is if you're going to give it to one group of people, you have to actually give it to a person who's suffering also from gender dysphoria. There's no reason not to do that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with trans people, but some of them suffer from gender dysphoria, similar to persons who may suffer from depression or any other ailment. Gender dysphoria is a recognized condition that someone has a true condition. And even if there are contrary opinions about that, that really doesn't matter. There's contrary opinions about how to necessarily take care of an asthmatic. There's contrary opinions about how necessarily to take care of a person who has cancer. There's always contrary opinions. But the clear actual scientific research is that gender dysphoria is recognized and that there's therapy which goes with gender affirming care. And that gender affirming care can be as simple as commissary items such as hair removal cream, razors, or pads to enhance or bind a person's body parts. Simple it really is that. And that's not me saying that. That actually comes from the Northern District of Georgia. Case just filed August 9th, 2024, where they ruled that the plaintiff, who was actually trying to just get 2 commissary items, not surgery, commissary items, had a likelihood of success because of the fact that they were able to show that they had gender dysphoria. So simply put, this bill attacks something that never really happens, and that's the surgeries. Whether a person's filed a lawsuit or not, we know that one of the first lawsuits that were filed took almost 30 years actually to get resolved. It really actually goes to hormone treatments and also the cosmetic treatments that actually exist. So what we're arguing about here is commissary products more than anything else. And the fact of the matter is, right now, the Georgia Department of Corrections says that it will be the responsibility of the state or the contractor to render any needed medical care. And this particular bill actually says that basically having hormone treatment or cosmetics, not surgery, can be needed medical care. That is the responsibility of the state. But I also want you to understand something too. It is not a free ride, because in the Georgia Department of Corrections, it actually does say that those products can be deducted from the prisoner's account. Obviously, that is not a lot, but it actually can be deducted from the prisoner's account. Look at the Federal Bureau of Prisons. 2019 also spoke on this issue. Under the heading transgender, page 25, states that inmate with a diagnosis of gender dysphoria will receive all proposed treatment plan to promote the physical and mental stability of the patient, including hormone therapy. And no treatment option is precluded. That was the rule in 2019 under President Donald Trump. And that remained the rule until today, where now they're trying to change it because supposedly it became a good campaign issue. And that is the key. The rule in 2019 under Donald Trump was that an inmate could receive all care to help his physical and mental stability of the patient under the heading of transgender, and that plan may include hormone therapy, and no treatment option would be precluded until it was decided that it was a good campaign issue and that persons believed they could run on it. So the law does not support this bill. The facts on the ground do not support it, because within the Bureau of Prisons, whether we're talking about Georgia or on the federal level, they actually have already said medically necessary care is something that they're going to do. This bill doesn't even support it, because it says when you have medical necessary care, whether you're talking about cosmetics or hormone therapy, that is something that everyone else can take advantage of except somebody who has gender dysphoria. Completely wrong. But I know the law and the facts can never get in the way of what persons think is a good political issue. But actually, it's really not a good political issue. And I'll talk about that in one moment. Before I get there, I want to say this, because there may be many people who are watching and say that this doesn't really apply to them, especially African Americans to some extent. They say, this doesn't apply to me. I'm not LGBTQ+, so this doesn't apply. First, I would say humanity and respect concerns everyone. But I also would share this. This morning we passed SB 120, DEI bill, which has everyone up in arms, especially African Americans, and it should be. This bill and the national narrative around this bill is that basically African Americans are not qualified. Your children are not qualified. Your grandchildren are not qualified. The bill directly calls you a special interest. When the recent head of the Joint Chiefs was fired, he was called a DEI hire. A plane crashes and immediately people say it is DEI. From the inception of affirmative action, there was the narrative that African Americans were not qualified. Wednesday, there will be a press conference about this bill, and persons will say that this bill and the global narrative around DEI is erasing Black History Month. They will say that it is in black colleges. They will say that it's actually erasing African Americans. And people will nod their heads and they will clap to that. And I may be one of them. But I would tell you to look at that bill on page 2. Because it says on page 2, it says it's illegal or wrong to provide special benefits to individuals on the basis of race, color, sex, ethnicity, national origin, gender identity, or sexual orientation. Understand that even though you may try to be separating yourself, those that you're going to say on Wednesday are trying to erase you, they're not separating you. So where are you going? So this idea is almost like being in a haunted house when you're young and the monster comes out and you start pushing your friends up to the front. But your back is to the wall. And so you push your friends up to the front to sacrifice them, but your back is to the wall. Where is it that you're going to be going? There is nowhere to go. So although you may believe there's a separation, the people that did the DEI bill that everyone's going to come up here for on Wednesday and complain about, they don't believe there's a separation. You're lumped right there with them. There is no separation. As I said just a few weeks ago, when you have that bus of hate, if you think it's going to miss you just because you do one thing, it's not. It will double back on you. And we are now seeing this morning that doubling back. And so there's no sacrificing, folks. There's no pushing anybody in front. We're all in this together, and we have to fight it together. But then someone would then bring you and say, but it's such a good campaign issue. Wow, we just can't beat it. It's just such a good campaign issue. I would encourage you to tell them this when they bring you that foolish notion, and I would tell you to encourage you to tell them this and say, unlike the presidential campaign, where they refused to talk about economics, and they decided to walk around with Republicans who were warmongers and people that nobody even knew, our campaign will not be like that. I would encourage you to tell them, after 23 years of Republican rule, Georgia poverty is 14th in the nation. Thousands of children are going hungry. I would encourage you to tell them that 20% of the children live in poverty, and that number is rising, especially among black and brown children. I would encourage you to tell them, after 23 years, Georgia is ranked 37th in the nation for child well-being. I would encourage you to tell them that Georgia is ranked 36th in the workforce as far as persons making less than $15 an hour. And then I would tell you to tell them that Democrats are the ones that present a minimum wage bill that has not been passed. I would encourage you to tell them, after 23 years, 500,000 people are uninsured, and the fact of the matter is rural hospitals are closing, and our healthcare system is actually one of the 5th worst in the nation, but it is Democrats who have been trying to push to actually expand Medicaid, and that has not happened. I would tell you to tell them that we can continue with these horrible stats, and I would tell you to tell them that Democrats have real solutions to these problems, and that the solution that the other side is giving you is to pick on kids, talk about surgery that may not happen for 30 years. With that, I yield the word.
Recognize the senator from the 39th.
Thank you, Mr. President. America is long overdue for a return to common sense. A revival is in order. And it's time our party steps up to claim the empty seat that the Republicans left vacant on the common sense train the moment Elon Musk stepped foot in the Oval Office. So let's talk about common sense. There is a long list of medical procedures that incarcerated individuals in Georgia do not receive, procedures that taxpayers do not cover: breast augmentation, liposuction, rhinoplasty, hair transplants, fertility treatments, gastric bypass, LASIK eye surgery, and even erectile dysfunction medication. If you are a prisoner in Georgia and you want any of these elective procedures, in other words, procedures that are not deemed medically necessary under the standards that govern prison health care, the state will not provide them, nor should it. This bill does not cut a single dollar from the state budget. Not one tax dollar in Georgia has ever been spent on sex change surgeries for inmates. So let's not pretend this is about fiscal responsibility. This bill simply makes explicit what is already the practice in Georgia. And yet here we are debating this as if it were some looming crisis, as if Georgia's prisons were on the verge of becoming gender-affirming care centers at the taxpayer's expense. Let me be clear, that is not the reality here in Georgia. That is not happening. There is no policy urgency on this issue, and I believe it is a complete disservice to the people we are elected to represent to pretend otherwise. But I am also a pragmatist, and the simple truth is that I cannot, in good conscience, support taxpayer-funded medical procedures for prisoners that we do not provide to law-abiding citizens who are struggling every day to afford basic health care. Because here's what I do know. If you are a woman in Georgia, cisgender or transgender, who cannot afford a necessary medical procedure, this state will not step in to help you. If you are a child in Georgia who needs mental health care, your family may be forced to wait months, even years, for treatment. If you are a pregnant woman in Georgia facing complications and need emergency care, you might have to drive hours to receive life-saving care, because we still have one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the country and hospitals that have closed or are on the verge of closing. We have a child care crisis, an affordable housing crisis, and a wage gap that punishes women at every stage of their lives. You can thank 23 years of Republican leadership for that, but that is the reality we are living in. And until we fix that, I cannot stand on this floor and say that incarcerated individuals who've wreaked havoc in the streets of Georgia should have access to procedures that struggling Georgians outside of prison do not. That is not fairness, and that is not justice. Now, let me be absolutely clear. My vote today does not change my commitment to the LGBTQ+ community. I believe that transgender people deserve full dignity, respect, and equal protection under the law. I will fight against discrimination in housing, in employment, and in health care. I will fight for protections that ensure transgender people in Georgia can live their lives safely and freely. And I will fight back against real attacks on LGBTQ+ rights, because those are the fights that matter. But I will not let my party be dragged into an argument that makes us look out of touch with the very people we claim to represent. My job is not to follow the loudest voices. My job is to lead with reason, with fairness, and with an unwavering commitment to the issues that actually improve the lives of the people I serve. That is what I've done since my first day at the Capitol. That is what I'm doing today. And that is what I will continue to do into the future. And no one, not the far right, not the far left, and certainly not the people who prefer outrage over solutions, will tell me otherwise. America is calling for a return to common sense, and I intend to answer that call, not by abandoning my values, but by standing firm in them. Thank you, Mr. President. Unless there are questions, I yield the well.
Yeah, no questions, Senator.
Thank you.
Recognize the senator from the 40th.
Thank you, Mr. President. 3 years ago, I stood in front of this body and told you all that I am the parent of a trans child. I had barely said those words to myself when I said them. I had told very few people, but the reason I came to the well to say those words that day is because I had listened to this debate. It was the first debate about the sports issue, and it felt like we were debating a political football instead of people. And so I came to this well to remind people that we are talking about very real people, children, parents, families. Some of you were here when I told that story, some of you weren't. But that story is really the story of my children, who are now young adults. It is not really my story, it is their story. I remember when I first learned about boys and girls. I was in kindergarten, and I learned the words lassie and laddie. Do you remember those words? There was a song about them. Have you ever seen a lassie go this way and that? Have you ever seen a laddie go this way and that. I played it on YouTube in my car on the way here today. I really wish that it was that simple. I have heard many of you say, when you present bills, that there's girls and there's boys, and that's it. But for me, even though I would like it to be that simple, it is not. So I feel when we discuss these bills in this chamber, and my goodness, have we discussed them a lot and spent so much time on them, and I sit in my chair and I feel like I'm on a little tiny island in the middle of an ocean, and I'm completely by myself. And there are huge continents out to my left and out to my right. And out to my left is the Democrats saying, I know this is true. And out to my right are the Republicans saying, I know this is true. And here I sit on my little island saying to myself, I don't know. I don't understand this. I am not comfortable with this. But I must tolerate that ambiguity because I must love my children. We are all lucky enough to have been born into a country that offers freedom. But with the freedom, you have to have tolerance. Because if you don't have tolerance, you begin chipping away at that freedom. If we allow people true freedom, it's going to make all of us a little bit uncomfortable from time to time. But we have to be tolerant in order to protect everyone's freedom. We have to deal with things that we don't like. I keep hearing over and over again that taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for surgeries medically necessary if you consider gender dysphoria a disorder, that taxpayers shouldn't have to pay for that. But we all have to sometimes pay for things we don't like. And in this case, it's probably pennies. If you take the expenses that could be associated with gender dysphoria with prisoners and divide that up amongst 11 million people, we are probably talking about spending pennies each on something that some of us are uncomfortable with. So what this begins to feel like, and I'm back to why I came to the well to talk about this subject 3 years ago, what this is feeling like is it feels like we're dealing with politics instead of people, particularly with this bill. Maybe not with some of the other ones, but with this bill, which is why I've come to the well. I've been pretty quiet on this subject the last few years, but this feels like putting politics before people. I feel like this is all about those TV commercials we all saw during the presidential election, those what I think were very distasteful commercials during the presidency, and people realized that that issue could score about 2%. But in a race that's close, and in races that are close, that 2% can be about winning or losing. So it feels like this topic, particularly with this bill, when I hear people talking about it, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they're talking about politics, not people. Now, there are very few institutions left in our country where people from the right and people from the left come together in the same room and have to fight out issues. Very few institutions. We all live in our bubbles these days. But this institution right here, this chamber, the chamber across the hall, the chambers across the country, this is one institution that's left where people from the left and right have to come together. And so it is our responsibility to lead the way, to demonstrate tolerance, to have those serious conversations, to help heal the divide that is killing our country. And bills like this that put politics before people only widen that divide, but they also hurt people. Every time one of these bills comes up, I have to worry about my children. I have to worry about how they are internalizing it. And every parent of a trans kid or a trans person has to worry about that. So I invite you to sit down with me, have a quiet conversation. We can listen to each other. And if we have that conversation, you might be surprised by some of the things I say, and I might be surprised by some of the things you say. But if we have those quiet conversations, instead of fighting out these politics in bills that just further the divide, then perhaps we can learn from one another. Thank you, Mr. President, and if there are no questions, I yield the well.
You have no questions? You have no questions? Thank you. All right, I think we got our last speaker, Senator from the 56th, and then we'll have the Senator from the 29th close the debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the first day of legislative session, I reminded you all of a debating trick. If you can't win the argument, you change the subject. Let's be honest. You as Democrats in your own caucus are divided on this issue. Throughout the last several votes, some of you voted with us, and others took a walk and did not vote at all. The overwhelming number of Georgians and Americans, both Republicans and Democrats, support this bill and the others. Candidly, if you vote against this bill, you are politically tone deaf. One day, I do sincerely hope and pray that those who would vote against this bill will care more about the victims than convicted criminals. Let's make sure we understand convicted criminals in the Georgia prison system. If you support sex change drugs and surgeries with taxpayer dollars for convicted criminals, I really believe you've lost touch with your constituents and your grip on reality. Folks, this is common sense. Some days I think it's not all too common anymore, but I would sure hope you would use your common sense today and vote for this bill. I yield the well.
Senator from the 41st, would you like to speak on it?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to talk about the infliction of pain on another person, to talk about real pain faced by real people, and to talk about this body's dismissal of that pain, indeed willful infliction of even more pain on those experiencing gender dysphoria in our prisons. You see, gender dysphoria is a mental health diagnosis. And when left untreated, we know the results. They are always tragic and sometimes fatal. What other diagnosis will this body decide to deny treatment for simply because someone has been convicted? What's next? Is it depression, suicidal ideation, psychosis, anxiety? All of these are diagnoses that a person can have based on their testimony, behavior, and the evaluation of a mental health care professional. Are we going to decide that those aren't real either? despite the mountains of medical expertise that speak to the contrary? Gender dysphoria is a mental health diagnosis, one that polls indicate that very few Americans have ever personally experienced, but nonetheless, it's very real. It's as real as cancer, as real as kidney failure, as serious as a heart attack. Gender dysphoria is painful and it's real. Can you imagine living in pain every single day? And there's a low-cost pill that could ease your suffering. But because a bunch of people who've never felt your pain have decided that it's not real, you don't get to have that pill. When we ban HRT, that's what we are doing to a fellow human being. We are leaving them to suffer. Removing all of the tools for treating that pain is fundamentally cruel. Deciding that one mental health diagnosis is not as real as the others, dismissing the pain of another's lived experience, it's wrong and it's cruel. When a person who is incarcerated has a diagnosis, we, the taxpayers, pay for their treatment. Gonorrhea, chlamydia, HIV, hepatitis, lymphoma, high blood pressure, we pay for it. Depression, anxiety, anorexia, psychosis, we pay for it. Cancer treatments that require medications, covered. Surgical intervention needed, covered. Diabetes that requires a daily medications, we got you. An amputation is needed, got you, it's covered. Broke your leg while committing a crime, no problem. We've got a splint and crutches for you. Nicked yourself while shanking somebody else. Well, we've got taxpayer-paid stitches waiting just for you. Develop glaucoma, need dialysis, we, the taxpayers, cover it. And why do we cover it for people who are incarcerated? Why? Because we are better than the criminal who shows no regard for human suffering. We cover it because we have a moral obligation to avoid inflicting pain on another human being, regardless of a crime that they've committed. We pay for medical care for people in prison because we have a constitutional duty to avoid cruel and unusual punishment. SB 185 is unconstitutional. It's unconstitutional because it denies health care to those who are in custody. We are denying them care when we know that they have something that is very painful and yet very treatable. To deny this care is willful disregard of our duty to provide medicine and healing for those in prison who need it. As a society, we've decided that when someone willfully causes another pain and shows no regard for human suffering, doing so is a criminal act. Yet when lawmakers withhold treatment for those with certain medical health diagnoses, when we disregard their suffering and cause immeasurable pain, well, they just call that Monday. But I want to take a step back for a moment. I want to take a step away from the issue of this General Assembly willfully choosing to inflict more pain on a minority population and turn to the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution. You see, the Eighth Amendment states that excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. The Eighth Amendment doesn't differentiate between separate classes or categories for those in our carceral system. It doesn't differentiate between those that the General Assembly deems normal and worthy and those that the body doesn't understand. The Eighth Amendment applies to every person in our carceral system. And how do we define cruel and unusual punishment? Well, the Supreme Court defines cruel and unusual punishment as punishments that are arbitrary, unnecessary, overly painful, humiliating, or degrading to human dignity. In a 2015 case, Diamond versus Owens, which sought to expose the harm endured by a transgender woman, did not care for gender dysphoria, the Department of Justice issued a clear directive for all state prisons. The directive said that prisons must continue hormone regimens that people came in needing at the time of incarceration. Bringing it a little closer to home, this body's disregard for the numerous lawsuits that have been filed in our state regarding anti-trans policies is just staggering. It's staggering that Georgia taxpayers have paid over $4 million in transgender discrimination cases since 2015. It's staggering that out of the 19 cases brought against the state regarding discrimination of transgender children and transgender people, the state has won 0 cases. The taxpayer money spent on legal action far outweighs the funds we could have directed to the medical care for those in our prisons. Yet, despite these staggering facts, the lawsuits, the directive from the Department of Justice, despite the unconstitutionality of SB 185, despite the pain that this bill inflicts on a small population with a treatable mental health diagnosis, here we are. Here we are again. But I want to be clear, I refuse to be silent. I refuse to accept an unconstitutional, cruel, and unnecessary piece of legislation that is going to be the norm here. I will not sit silently by and watch a group of Georgia citizens be crushed and beaten down by this body yet again. And before I take my seat, I want to address the elephant in the room. I know good and well that public polling does not support gender-affirming care for people who are incarcerated. But I am keenly aware of our history, a history in which public opinion has often not been on the right side of justice, a history in which public polling has often sided with the majority and further isolated and forsaken the minority. I know this is not politically popular, but I stand here today urging my colleagues to vote no on this bill, to vote no as a sign of your commitment to humanity. Vote no for dignity. Colleagues, I beg you, do not let public polling persuade you to do something that you know in your heart is fundamentally unconstitutional, and quite frankly, it's downright immoral. With that, I yield the well.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from the 29th, would you like to close?
Thank you, Mr. President. First thing I'll address is the amendment. Again, if you read on line 83 of the bill, it says hormone replacement therapy treatment for state inmates, and this is talking about things that are allowed. Hormone replacement treatment for state inmates who were being treated with such therapy prior to the effective date of this act, provided that the provision of such therapy is solely for the purpose of transitioning off such therapy. And there are processes to handle transitioning off such therapy. They don't cut it off. They help them transition off. So, friends, I ask you to vote down amendment number 1. I got to tell you, when I came up here to present this legislation, I knew there'd be some pushback. And you always try to anticipate what the pushback is, because I know we have some well-educated, well-skilled attorneys in the room on both sides. I think we were counting up the other day, there's about 9 attorneys in this room. Maybe we need to consider a piece of legislation to address that. But what I heard was, and I want to tell you, it's almost laughable. We're talking about this, and I heard somebody come up here and start screaming, hate, 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 hate. And what I realized right then is that person didn't have an argument. If there's any hate, I can tell you where it's coming from. I'm a part of a caucus, and the 7 years I've been here, I've not seen hate against anybody. And I promise you, those that say they walk amongst the transgender community, they walk amongst those who feel whether they have a mental disorder that makes them feel a certain way, or whether they make a choice to feel a certain way, they walk around as if they were walking amongst this tribe. I promise you, in my 30 years, I've walked amongst that tribe. When they came here to meet at the ropes, I went out and spoke to every person out there. I worked in a large city in law enforcement. I promise you, I've walked amongst people that you've only read about. And some of these are people with serious mental health issues. And I heard people come up here and talk about Republican, 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 Republican. And so my extemporaneous mind said, they have no argument. They just don't like Republicans. And then I heard somebody throw out Elon Musk's name. I hate to tell you, but when I called Elon about this bill, he did not answer. It didn't happen. And listen, I heard Wells' speeches that sounded more like sermons than the speeches discussing a piece of legislation. And let me tell you, my friend, any one of us can get up here anytime we want to. And we can start talking about anything we want to. And we can make it sound like anything we want to. But the citizens of Georgia put us up here to have serious conversations about issues. And we represent the state of Georgia. And if there's a department with an issue, and that issue can be solved, then we attempt to solve that problem. Nobody walked up here in a black robe. So you can stand here all day long and say something's unconstitutional. But until you earn yourself a black robe, which requires a law degree to start with, and until you have a gavel in your hand, please, please forgive me if I don't quiver and shake and sweat when you say a piece of legislation is unconstitutional. That's just not me. But I'm going to tell you, to come up here and deflect and call other people in this chamber haters, to assume that there are certain segments of the population that the caucus that I represent don't like, hate, want to mistreat, want to segregate, all that does is show that you don't know. This legislation is really simple. You can pump all the emotion you want to in there. You can do all this other stuff. But let me tell you something. I can tell you one guy in here doesn't hate anybody. It's a word we weren't allowed to use when I was a kid at home. Everybody knows the word I have a tendency to use way too much when I'm locked in a room with my friends. I would have probably got away with using that word, which I never did, before I would have ever gotten away with using the word hate. Because my mother said you had to go to a dark place to hate something. And the men and women that I serve in this body with do not hate anybody. So what you need to start doing is maybe break out your books, find you some experts, quit making it about politics. Because I'm going to tell you, if we're talking about gender-affirming care, and if we're talking about gender dysphoria, then I'll tell you one thing that's not in my mind. It's not mailers. And let me be perfectly clear. If you think you're a member of the Democratic Party, and I'm going to waste one bit of energy spending campaign money to do a mailer about you, then God bless you. I got more important things to do. The 200,000 people that put me in there, put me in there. And if you love what people say here in the well, do me a favor, be quiet and listen. They don't need to hear the chatter. Let them say what they got to say. This is good legislation. This is compassionate legislation. If you don't like it and don't vote for it. But quit making it political, because that's what you're doing. Please vote down the amendment, vote for the underlying bill, and with that, Mr. President, I yield the well.
Senator has closed debate. All right, we're going to take up Amendment 1, authored by the senator from the 44th. Amendment 1. Is there objection to Amendment 1? All right, there is objection. If all those in favor of Amendment 1 will vote yea, opposed nay. Secretary, unlock the machine. On the amendment number 1, the yeas are 19 and the nays are 34, and so amendment number 1 has failed. Is there objection to agreeing to the reported committee, which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The reported committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none. The main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill? All those in favor vote yea, opposed nay. Secretary, unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 37 and the nays are 15. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. All right. Hopefully we'll start moving now. Secretary Reed, SB 111.
Senate Bill 111 by Senator Albers, the 56, and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Title 10 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated related to commerce and trade so as to enact the Georgia Consumer Privacy Protection Act to protect the privacy of consumer personal data in the state, to provide for definitions, to provide for applicability, to provide for exemptions, to provide for responsibilities of processors and controllers, to provide for notice and disclosure, to provide for security practices, to protect consumer personal data, to allow a controller to offer different goods or services under certain conditions, to provide for limitations, to provide for statutory construction, to provide for preemption of local regulation, to provide for related matters, to provide for an effective date, to repeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Economic Development and Tourism recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Beach of the 21st District. Chairman, that completes the order, Mr. President.
Senator from the 44th, what purpose do you rise?
Ask for unanimous consent, Mr. President, to excuse the senator from the 41st for business inside the Capitol.
Without objection, Senator from the 41st is excused. I now recognize the Senator from the 56th to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand before you this evening to discuss an issue that is increasingly vital in our digital age. an issue that touches the lives of every single one of our constituents, the protection of consumer privacy. Senate Bill 111, the Georgia Consumer Privacy Protection Act, represents a significant stride towards securing the rights of our residents, promoting their safety, and ensuring their privacy. This was a foundational recommendation from the Artificial Intelligence Study Committee, which met throughout 2024. Artificial intelligence will be perhaps the most impactful thing in our lifetime. Over the past few years, the world has become increasingly interconnected. Beginning with the advent of the internet and digital technology and now artificial intelligence, our personal information has become more exposed than ever. Every day we share financial details, our contact information, and even our personal thoughts online, be it through social media, e-commerce, or other digital platforms. Yet while these developments have brought many conveniences, they've opened the door to significant risks. From large-scale data breaches to more localized cyber attacks, the threat is real and present. Our consumer data is continually at risk, and the consequences can be dire. Identity theft, financial loss, invasion of privacy, these are all things that our constituents may face in if their personal data falls into the wrong hands. This is why the Georgia Consumer Privacy Protection Act is not just important, but absolutely necessary. This bill is a comprehensive approach to protect our consumers' personal data. It provides for clear definitions, outlines specific responsibilities for data processors, controllers, and mandates notice and disclosure requirements. It also ensures the security practices are put in place to protect consumer data. In essence, this bill is about accountability and transparency. It puts the power back in the hands of consumers, allowing them to control their data and how it is used. Simply doing things like opting out of selling, targeting, and profiling you and your personally identifiable information. The Consumer Privacy Protection Act also importantly provides for certain exemptions and limitations. This means that not one size fits all, but rather one that considers the unique circumstances of different situation. The flexibility ensures that the law remains effective and relevant and fair for all the parties involved. Moreover, this bill promotes the preemption of local regulation, and it will prevent a patchwork of different and potentially conflicting laws, thus ensuring consistency and predictability in the rules that govern our digital landscape. It's a forward-looking bill that anticipates the complexity and ever-changing digital world. In addition to these benefits, this act has the potential to restore trust and confidence in your digital life and transactions. With the enactment of this bill, Georgia citizens can comfortably engage in digital activities, knowing their data is protected more than ever, and that their rights and recourse should not be compromised. The Georgia Consumer Privacy Protection Act is not just a piece of legislation, it's a statement of our commitment to the welfare and rights of our constituents. It's a testament to the belief of the importance of privacy in our increasingly digital world, and most importantly, a reflection of our dedication here in the Georgia State Senate to create a safer, more secure, and empowering digital environment for all Georgians. This language was developed in partnership from a multi-state working group of our colleagues around the nation, TechNet, the leading technology group nationwide, the Technology Association of Georgia, numerous chambers of commerce, and other important stakeholders. You will see a letter on your desk reflecting some of that support today. I urge each and every one of you to support the Georgia Consumer Privacy Protection Act, show our constituents that we're committed to protecting their rights, their privacy, and their safety in this digital age while keeping Georgia the #1 place to do business. Mr. President, if there are no questions, I will yield the well.
You have one question, Senator. We recognize the senator from the 14th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Yield.
Certainly for my friend from the 14th.
Is it not true, Senator, that this was a good bill last year? It is a good bill this year, and I am honored to support this as a step in the right direction.
Senator, I appreciate your great support.
Thank you, Senator.
All right, you have no questions, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Any other senator want to speak for or against the bill? Chair hears none. Is there objection to previous question being ordered? Chair hears none. Previous question is ordered. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none. The main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill. All those in favor vote yea. All opposed nay. Secretary, unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 53. Wow. Yeas are 53 and the noes are from the typical no crowd back there. The bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. The good old no crowd, boy. I tell you what, Senator from 27th, I bet your kids have no fun, do they? You're the no caucus. Senator 53, you'll be right behind him soon, as soon as you start having kids. Moving on to SB 151, Senate Bill 151. Secretary, read the caption.
Senate Bill 151 by Senator Beach to the 21st and others, a bill between title and act to create the Joint Development Authority of North Fulton Municipalities, to provide a short title, to provide definitions, to provide for powers of the authority, to provide for directors of the authority, to provide a development area, to provide for revenue bonds and other obligations of the authority, to recite constitutional authority, to provide for effect on other authorities, to provide for related matters, to repeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes. Mr. President, Senate Committee on State and Local Governmental Operations General recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Dixon, Chairman. Mr. President, the minority report to Senate Bill 151 has been attached. That completes the order, Mr. President.
I recognize the pride of Fulton County right here. There it is.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Senators, I bring before you SB 151, which will create the Joint Development Authority of North Fulton. You know, Senators, when I moved to North Fulton 32 years ago, we had two cities, Roswell and Alpharetta. The rest of North Fulton was unincorporated Fulton County. Now, if you fast forward to today, we have 6 cities, and there is no unincorporated Fulton County within these 6 cities. And I will tell you, Fulton County is a unique county. It's a unique animal, if you will. It's 91 miles long, and then in the middle you have this big giant called Atlanta. You have South Fulton, Atlanta, and North Fulton. And our needs are very different. So from a geographic standpoint, the needs of South Fulton are very different than North Fulton. And then Atlanta has their own development authority called Invest Atlanta. This bill simply creates a North Fulton Joint Development Authority so that the 6 cities have control over their own economic development. You may ask, why is this important? With the state investing $4 billion in the Georgia 400 corridor, with 16 miles of new lanes northbound and 16 miles of lanes southbound in MARTA, bus rapid transit going up the middle on Georgia 400, we will continue to see economic growth. The state of Georgia believes Georgia 400 is an economic engine of our state. So all SB 51 simply does is gives us the tool in our toolbox in North Fulton to help facilitate this growth. So I just ask for your favorable support, and Mr. President, I'll yield for questions. If not, I'll yield the well.
You have no questions, Senator.
Okay. Thank you very much. I ask for your support.
I recognize the senator from the 39th, the other pride of Fulton County. Here they come. Opposite.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I rise in opposition to this bill. The creation of a North Fulton Development Authority is a solution in search of a problem. It does not enhance economic growth, it weakens it. It does not create efficiency, it duplicates bureaucracy, and it does not serve the people, it serves confusion. Let's be clear, Develop Fulton already works. It has successfully served every corner of the county from north to south under an existing, effective legal framework. It has provided consistent, transparent, and fair economic development support for years. The bill before us today undermines that success in favor of fragmentation, uncertainty, and duplication. Develop Fulton's balanced board includes representatives from North and South Fulton, as well as county and school officials, ensuring a countywide perspective that the proposed authority would lack. We often talk about streamlining government and avoiding unnecessary bureaucracy. So why would we create yet another government agency within a county that already has a functioning one? The state is actively working to reduce government bloat, yet this proposal would do the opposite, layering in a new authority that serves no distinct purpose beyond adding confusion. When businesses and investors look at a region, they seek stability and clarity. The creation of a separate authority introduces uncertainty, the kind that makes businesses think twice before investing. If Fulton County starts carving itself into separate competing development authorities, we send a dangerous signal that we are not unified, that we do not have a single strong economic vision, and that businesses looking to invest here might be better off going elsewhere. One of the most misleading narratives behind this bill is that North Fulton is somehow going to be left behind in development decisions, but here are the facts. Develop Fulton has already approved every single project brought forward from North Fulton. The 9-member board that governs economic development includes members representing North Fulton, ensuring fair input. In fact, the author of this very legislation was either chairman, vice chairman, or a board member when some of those North Fulton projects were greenlit. So what exactly is broken here? If projects are being approved, if representation is fair, if development is moving forward, what is the justification for breaking apart an already successful system? Businesses and investors that have spent time and money navigating our existing system could suddenly find themselves in limbo, and that's not how you build trust in a business-friendly environment. A business-friendly environment, by the way, which has yielded over $1.4 billion in investments in North Fulton alone, creating or retaining 20,000 jobs, and has added more than $62 million in new net tax revenue in just North Fulton. The existing authority already ensures that all affected stakeholders, from county to school officials, have a seat at the table, and this new proposal shuts them out. And let's not forget that 3 of the 6 cities that represent North Fulton already have their own development authorities: Sandy Springs, Roswell, and Alpharetta. So in these cases, we wouldn't just be adding one more layer of bureaucracy, we'd be adding a 3rd layer. Where is the logic in that? Where is the efficiency? This is not economic development. This is over-legislating at its worst. And finally, we need to talk about process. This was not a bill that was brought in front of the full Fulton County delegation. And that is more than just a procedural misstep. The facts are clear. Develop Fulton's already working for North Fulton. Creating a separate authority introduces confusion and economic stability, especially since Develop Fulton was created in statute and will continue to operate in all areas of the county because there is not a separate bill to move forward that would keep it from doing that. It duplicates bureaucracy in a way that even state leaders like us should oppose, and it jeopardizes ongoing projects that businesses and nonprofits are counting on. So we must ask ourselves, are we here to build a stronger, united Fulton County? Are we here to create unnecessary divisions that serve no real purpose? I think each of you may have received over the weekend an email from the chair of the Fulton County Develop Fulton Authority, the current chair, who has laid out for us many of the things that I just said, but who has underscored the fact that North Fulton will continue to be an important part of the development work that the authority is doing, and that we are urged by him as well to reject this proposed legislation and to stand with Develop Fulton in preserving the foundation that's made Fulton County a leader in Georgia and around the globe. I urge you also to reject this proposal. Let's not fix what isn't broken, and let's not divide what works best when united. I will take questions or yield the well, whichever one. I'm happy to yield, but I might have a question from my friend and colleague.
I think you have a friendly question here, Senator. Recognize Senator from 36.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the Senator in the well for your presentation, and it's accurate to say that you are the chair of the Fulton County delegation in the Senate. Is that not the case?
Yes, I am, and thank you for that. I forgot to introduce myself as the chair of the Senate's Fulton County bipartisan delegation, who did not get a chance to pre-vet this bill with the other members of the delegation before it was brought to committee.
Thank you for sharing that information. I'm a member of that delegation as well, and isn't it true we had no opportunity to make input on it? And isn't it true that as we consider this vote, and I agree with you, this is layers and layers and layers of government. Aren't we just setting up a situation for future conflict and competition for entities within one county?
We are. In fact, there's a term for that, and it's called forum shopping, when sometimes business will come, and in fact, they will pit one development authority against the other, looking for the best tax break that they may be able to secure for themselves. And that's not the best way to do business, certainly not within one county. And add to that the other development authorities that already exist in the cities and the municipalities themselves, and it just breeds confusion.
And isn't it true? And I think you have made this point. We could actually, if we voted yes to create this entity in North Fulton, actually wind up with deals that are not financially beneficial to the county, because the low ball goes and the low ball goes, and before you know it, we're headed on a downward spiral. Or that's certainly the potential. Isn't that the case?
Yes, the senator knows of which she speaks.
Thank you for pointing out all these salient facts, and I would implore colleagues to consider, as you cast this vote, isn't it true that it would be in the best interest of a sound review of this that this not go forward? How many of us, I would ask, would like this to happen in the counties that they represent? If the answer is yes, well, that's your answer. But isn't it true, we're asking people to take a close look at this and understand the downside of this. Is that true?
That is very true.
Thank you.
Please, I'm urging you to vote no on this bill. It is not necessary. It is duplicative, and it is not what the county is looking for. Thank you very much.
You do have one more question.
I do.
But you're welcome to yield at any time, Senator.
I know. Who's got a question for me? I shall yield the well. I cannot
Senator has
tell.
yielded. Woo! I love it when people take good cues. All right, Senator from the 20th, would you like to make a statement? What purpose you
Mr.
rise?
President, parliamentary inquiry.
State
please.
your inquiry.
Mr. President, to quote the former senator from the 45th, I live out in the hinterlands. And all these cities and communities up there, you know, in the metro area and all that get me very confused. My question, my parliamentary inquiry is, how will this impact the city of Mulberry?
I'm sure if we hung around long enough, Senator, we'd figure out a way. Recognize the Senator from the 56 to close debate, I hope.
Thank you, Senators. For one last comment, the same arguments we heard against this bill today were the same ones we heard when we created the city of Sandy Springs and the city of Johns Creek and the city of Milton, which became some of the most successful cities in that area, and all the other cities that happened after that. It's brought positive economic growth and prosperity. Fulton County, if it was measured in its population by state, would be bigger than 9 other states in population. It's enormous, and because it's our largest capital county and state, it deserves separate attention in one area. This is a good bill, and I'd urge your favorable consideration. Thank you. I yield the will.
Senators yielded. Senator from the 21st, would you like to close debate? Wave. Oh, the body. You're playing with the votes, man. Playing with the voters.
Thank y'all. Thank you, Mr. President. Let me just say this, that the reason for this is when you look at the 6 cities in North Fulton, we would be the 5th largest county in the state at 388,600 population. So it's almost like it's its own county. But more importantly, when you look up the 400 corridor, you have 900 technology companies, the fintech business, and again, we're getting ready to invest $4 billion. When I speak as economic development and tourism chairman around the state, I talk about 3 economic engines. The Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, the busiest airport in the World Congress Center, and the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and Savannah Port and Brunswick Port. I have now added a 4th economic engine. It's the North Fulton corridor with the fintech business and with all the technology companies. We're going to continue to grow, and we need to have our own development authority. Currently, there's 9 board members on Develop Fulton, only 2 from North Fulton. Sandy Springs does not have a development authority, only Alpharetta and Roswell. So I would just tell you, we need this tool in our toolbox as we continue to grow and create jobs in North Fulton. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the will.
All right. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? Is there objection to the previous question being ordered? Chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none. The main question is ordered. The question is on the passage of the bill. All those in favor will vote yea. All opposed, nay. Secretary, unlock the machine. Senator from the 31st, what purpose do you rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
For the senator from the 21st, isn't it not true ag is still the #1 industry in Georgia?
Senator knows what he speaks. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 32, the nays are 23. This bill, having received requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. All right, we're going to have one more bill, I think. Maybe two more. I don't know. Depends on how long this one takes. Let's see, it's 8 o'clock, so let's see how long this one gets debated. All right, Secretary, read the caption.
Senate Bill 175 by Senator Robertson on the 29th and others. The bills being titled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 2 of Title 21 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated related to general provisions regarding elections and primaries, so as to prohibit the use of ranked choice voting, to provide for certain exceptions, to provide for a definition, to provide for related matters, to repeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes. Mr. President, Senate Committee on Ethics recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Watson, Chairman. Mr. President, Minority Report to Senate Bill 171 has been attached, and that completes the order, Mr. President.
Recognize Senator from the 29th.
Friends, y'all are very familiar with SB 175. This is legislation to ban ranked choice voting in Georgia. And let me tell you, this is not the Republicans having a talent for coming up with a bad solution to a non-existent problem. What this is, there's been a push for ranked choice voting. It is not organic. It is not a grassroots movement, but it's a concerted national campaign by a group of elite mega donors to change elections across this nation. Americans want elections with clear rules that deliver clear winners. We have done a lot here in Georgia to do that. I and others in this room were part of a lawsuit related to SB 202. As the lawsuits were dropped, we saw voter turnout skyrocket because of SB 202 for both parties, Democrats and Republicans. We saw a seismic shift in the transparency of Georgia elections. And now, what this small group of elitists want to do, who pay their lobbyists very, very well, if you don't believe so, just pull the report, to push ranked choice voting. It's used in New York City, where they've complained many times about confusion and spent millions of dollars to educate. Again, ranked choice voting, you've heard it before, you voted it out before, to prohibit ranked choice voting in Georgia, and I ask you to do that again tonight. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the well.
I know we have a minority report on this. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? One of those lawyers back there? All right. I know you are, Senator. All right. If nobody else wants to speak on it, we'll do the minority report right now, calling the senator from the 44th to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening. I think this is my last time in the well today. I know we're all getting tired. We're all getting a little punchy. But I want to make some important points about the bill that we have in front of us. I do not think it is good policy to ban ranked choice voting in Georgia at this time, especially because it actually isn't even legal. So the bill accomplishes nothing at all. Ranked choice voting is not necessarily a perfect solution to some of what ails American democracy today, but it is one example of a much needed reform to help break the cycle that we are currently in of polarization, dysfunction, and frustration that has gripped our democracy for far too long. Right now, our elections reward the most extreme voices. And I don't need to tell all of you why, because all of you know exactly why. Our primaries, where all or almost all of our elections are decided, partially due to gerrymandering, partially due to geographic distributions of partisanship, all those primaries are dominated by the most committed ideological activists. And we all know this because we all live it, and it is part of our existence as politicians. We've all shared in the anteroom or over dinner stories of unreasonable, misinformed, out-of-touch constituents. They might be one of those, they might be all three sometimes, who try to bully us and form online mobs to try to enforce ideological conformity. These activists make up a tiny fraction of voters, but they're the ones choosing the candidates. Now, I guess I need to give them all a shout out because clearly these activists chose every single one of us. So, it's not all bad. But I still think the system is resulting in a lot of frustration out of the average voter. There are major issues with having a relatively tiny group of activists choose basically all of the legislators in our chamber and also the one across the hall. The vast majority of Georgians who just want their government to work, solve problems, and represent their interests and priorities and the things they actually care about: healthcare, the economy, crime, health, taxes, education. We spend so little time on the public's priorities and so much time on the priorities of some group in someone's primary. Voters writ large are frustrated, unheard, and underrepresented. So ranked choice voting is one way that could fix this. Instead of forcing voters to pick between what many would regard, none of us, but many through the broad ideological middle of the electorate would regard as the lesser of two evils, it allows them to rank candidates in order of preference. This means that winning candidates must actually appeal beyond their base and earn support from a broader range of voters. It rewards consensus building rather than extremism. It encourages candidates to engage with all voters, not just those in their respective primary or the most radical voices in their party. And it also lessens negative campaigning because instead of just going totally negative against the person that you think may be ahead of you in the race, you are wanting to win over their voters and hope that they will pick you second. So it encourages, it lessens negative, toxic campaigning. And it eliminates the spoiler effect, where some voters feel that they can't vote for their preferred candidate because they know that candidate is not viable. This allows them to vote for their preferred candidate and other candidates so they know that their vote will count in the end. The impact is less gridlock, more accountability, and better problem solving. States and cities that have adopted ranked choice voting have seen broader coalitions formed and a government that has a greater mandate from the people. But another benefit that should be very important to us here in Georgia is that our runoff system is extremely costly. Millions and millions of dollars in taxpayer money. A recent report from KSU found that the staggering costs of our runoffs recently were $75 million. The runoff election is also notably less democratic than the first round of voting because turnout drops anywhere from like 70% to 90%. Almost all of our runoffs in DeKalb this year saw turnout drop 90% or more. Often there's just one race left on the ballot. And so all the hubbub and chatter that you get from having multiple contests voted on at the same time disappears. People get busy and they forget about it. And so then when you have this like 10% of voters deciding the result when 90% just dropped off, That's also not democratic at all. Americans are hungry for reform. Georgians are hungry for reform. People are seeking a government that represents the broad middle, not just the loudest voices in the room or online. This would offer a path forward, trying ranked choice voting. But banning it just keeps a broken system in place. And since it actually isn't currently legal, except for our overseas voters, it bears repeating that the bill does nothing at all. So let's embrace thinking about reforms. I would love to make elections work for the people, for the broad center of Georgians' public opinion, not just for political elites or activists that pay attention to politics about as much as all the rest of us do, which we know is a very small percentage of the electorate. I'd like to help get American democracy off its moribund, toxic gridlock and back to serving citizens again. I'd love to let our cities pilot ranked choice voting, which is what many of them have asked for in my district and in many of your districts. That's what they would like to do. Try it, see if it works. Perhaps we could all learn a lesson from that trial. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't have to go further. But I do know that in trying to shut down any notion of reform, we do nothing but reward political extremists and keep a system in place that Americans currently are very dissatisfied by and are, in fact, trying to throw grenades into every chance they can because they do not feel represented. So, Mr. President, I will yield the well if I have no questions.
You do have one question, Senator.
All right, I will yield for questions.
Recognize the senator from the 27th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, do you yield?
Of course.
You said that you'd like to see local municipalities be able to implement this. I'm curious how they would implement it, though. What system would they use for that? Because as you probably know, the Dominion machines have not been EAC certified to use the ranked choice voting module that's a part of those. So my concern is that while you said it would be very expensive, our runoff system is very expensive, which I would agree with. Buying new voting equipment would be over $100 million. So does that concern you at all?
I think we don't we have some other bills that are already moving us toward new voting equipment, right? But anyway, let me answer your question. So the legislation that has been pending in the House in prior sessions, I don't know if it's been refiled, would allow the piloting of ranked choice voting. And I cannot recall, so I don't want to misrepresent exactly how it would work. But I do know how it works for our overseas and military voters, and it would probably work like that.
Steve, further yield?
Sure.
Well, overseas voters use paper ballots, and so that would be the only way that it actually would work, would be a more thorough overhaul of the system, which that's kind of my point, is that until and unless Dominion is certified, under current Georgia law, it would actually be much more expensive to do this than to stick with the current runoff system.
Senator,
Isn't
that's
that true?
only if you do that statewide, and no one's talking about that. We're talking about there are a few cities that would like to pilot it. So I don't believe that the expense would be astronomical, and I believe that those particular machines or paper ballots could be utilized. There are ways that could make it happen for a limited pilot without upending every Dominion BMD that we currently use.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
You have no more
All right, thank you. I yield the well.
Now that was the minority part. The author of the bill. Where's the senator from the 29th? Oh, good. He stepped off, so we can close debate. We can close debate. Does any other senators wish to speak for or against? Is there objections to the previous question being ordered? Chair hearing none. Previous question is ordered. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none. The main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill. All those in favor will vote yea. Opposed, nay. Secretary, unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 36 and nays are 19. This bill, having received requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Secretary Reed, Senate Bill 195.
Senate Bill 195 by Senator Hufstetler of the 52nd and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 6 of Chapter 4 of Title 26 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated related to pharmacies, so as to provide that pharmacists are authorized to dispense pre-exposure prophylaxis and post-exposure prophylaxis under certain conditions, to amend Article 2 of Chapter 34 of Title 43 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated related to medical practice, so as to provide for the approval or development of a training program for pharmacists by the Georgia State Board of Pharmacy to require pharmacists to complete such training program before dispensing pre-exposure prophylaxis or post-exposure prophylaxis, to provide for definitions, to provide for related matters, to repeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes. Mr. President, the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Watson, Chairman. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Recognize Senator from the 52nd. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on 1 second. Hold up. Sit tight, Senator. Hold
Mr. President, Senator Hufstetler of the 52nd offers the following amendment number 1 to amend Senate Bill 195 by replacing Georgia Drug and Narcotics Agency on lines 196 and 197 with Georgia State Board of Pharmacy, by replacing board on line 269 with Georgia State Board of Pharmacy, and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
All right, Senator. Floor is yours. Senator from the 52nd.
Thank you, Mr. President. Hopefully this bill will be a little bit easier than some, but the HIV rate of new infections in Atlanta is about the 4th highest in the country. One thing that does help out with this is some preventative medicine is available. This medicine would be dispensed by pharmacists, not prescribed by pharmacists. We don't have prescription in there. They're dispensing it. Distinction I need to make clear to everybody. But the cost of that generically can be as low as $23 to prevent it. The cost of treating it once they have it is about $30,000 to $70,000 a year. And so this bill would, I think, lower the cost of health care as well as improve quality of life. The amendment is because in 4 places where we had board, they thought it should say the Georgia State Board of Pharmacy, and in 2 places where we said the Georgia Drug and Narcotics Agency, they asked that they be removed because there's no narcotics involved in this medicine. If there's no questions, I'd urge you to support Amendment 1 in the bill, and I'll yield to well.
There are no questions, Senator. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? Chair hears none. Is there objection? Previous question being ordered. Chair hears none. Previous question is ordered. Questions on the adoption of Amendment 1. Question on adoption of Amendment 1 authored by the senator from the 52nd. Is there objection? Without objection, Amendment 1 is added. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection? Main question being ordered. Chair hears none. Main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill as amended. All those in favor of the bill vote yea. All opposed nay. Secretary unlock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 55, the nays are 0. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed as amended. Secretary Reed, Senate Bill 29.
Senate Bill 29 by Senator Williams of the 25th and others, a bill to be entitled an act to amend Article 6A of Chapter 3 of Title 35 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated related to DNA sampling, collection, and analysis, so as to provide for the collection of DNA samples of individuals arrested for the commission of a felony at the time such individuals are booked or otherwise processed by a detention facility, to revise provisions relating to destruction of DNA profiles, to provide for related matters, to repeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes. Mr. President, Senate Committee on Judiciary recommends that this bill do pass. Respectfully submitted, Senator Strickland, Chairman. Mr. President, a minority report to Senate Bill 29 has been attached. Mr. President, Senator Williams of the 25th offers the following amendment number 1 to amend Senate Bill 29 by replacing lines 101 through 116 with the following. 1, a certified copy of the applicable, a court order or documentation from the prosecuting attorney stating that all charges for which the DNA profile is created are dismissed and for other purposes. Mr. President, Senator Hatch of the 50th and others offer the following amendment number 2 to amend Senate Bill 29 by replacing felony on lines 29 or on lines 26 and 59 with serious violent felony, as such term is defined in Code Section 17-10-6.1. That completes the order, Mr. President.
All right, recognize the Undertaker from the 25th District. You know, I just realized something, Senator. Both you and the House member from Baldwin County are both Undertakers. How about that? Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. President. I bring to you a bill today, Senate Bill 29. This bill will allow law enforcement to swab inside of your cheek for someone arrested of a felony offense. The person, when he's fingerprinted, and then he'll be swabbed. Every state that touches Georgia has been doing this. Georgia's the last southeastern state that does not collect DNA. Alabama started in 2010. Florida in 2009, North Carolina in 2009, South Carolina in 2008, Tennessee in 2007. Here it is, 2025, ladies and gentlemen, we need this. Rape kits are finally being processed. That is only one piece of the puzzle. We need the other part of the puzzle. We need to know who did the crime. We could have a serial rapist or murderer living here close to us. But not only does this DNA help convict the guilty, it can set you free. There was a case down in South Georgia. A man was charged with a crime of killing a couple in a church. He spent 20 years in prison.
Hold on one second, Senator. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I know the time is getting late, but please give the senator your attention.
Dennis Perry was sent to prison after being charged with a murder in Camden County of a couple. He spent 20 years in prison. Finally, DNA evidence and a match came up, and Eric Spare was charged with a murder. This man was turned loose after 20 years in prison. That is too long, ladies and gentlemen. Harold Swain, Thelma Swain, was killed in Waverly, Georgia. Someone acting as the suspect's boss called the police and told them that he was at work that day. 375 DNA exonerations have taken place between 1989 and 2020. DNA is a powerful tool, but it is not enough to convict someone. Usually the DNA can be used to prove guilt or innocence, but it's often used with a combination of other information and facts. The cost of a swab kit is $1.44 plus postage to be mailed. This is long overdue. I hope that you will vote for this bill. I'll yield for any questions, Mr. President.
You do not have any questions, Senator.
Thank you. I yield the well.
Oh, yes, Senator, did you speak to the amendment, Senator? Senator, did you speak to your amendment here?
I have amendment AM 550083. This is something that Ledge Council brought forward that clears up that if you're exonerated and found innocent, then your DNA swab is purged. It is not kept on file. So you would have to have proof that you were exonerated, found innocent, but your DNA profile would be purged and would not be kept on file.
All right, Senator, you can either yield. You have one question, but you can yield if you want to. You want to take a question?
Yes, sir.
All right. Senator from the 55th.
To my distinguished colleague, will you yield?
Is your amendment up here? No, I don't have it. I'm sorry.
Will you yield, please?
I do. Yes, sir.
Is it not true, Senator, that if I accuse you of a felony, you would be, under this particular bill, be required to give up your DNA?
If you have arrested me for the commission of a felony, yes, sir.
Would that not violate guilty until proven innocent?
No, sir, not necessarily. It could, matter of fact, as I had stated, could actually set you free and prove that you didn't do it by collecting your DNA.
Will you further yield, Senator?
Yes, sir, I certainly do.
I applaud the sense that you are proceeding, but is it not further true that we have DNA, we have rape kits that are yet to be resolved going back for years in certain of our counties?
They are processing the rape kits. They're probably 2 to 3 weeks out from what I have been told, that they have just about caught up. But that DNA is on file from those rape kits, and if they can match that DNA from someone who's committed a burglary or some other crime who they've gotten arrested for that felony, then we could probably take a serial rapist off the streets.
Thank you, my distinguished colleague. I will not ask you any further questions.
Thank you. I think there's a second amendment too, Mr. President.
Oh, yeah, you've got 2 amendments here. Yeah.
Okay, there's a second amendment on lines 26 and 59 by replacing serious felony with serious violent felony, as such term is defined in Code Section 1710-61. This is known as the 7 deadly sins. So you would have to commit very serious felony in order to be swabbed. Okay.
He's going to speak to it, Senator.
All right, I yield the well. Thank you.
All right, you will. Senator from the 50th, you want to speak to your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of Amendment 2, which is a friendly amendment signed by the bill's author. This hatchet brass amendment is basically you're replacing felony on lines 26 and line 59 with serious violent felony, as such term is defined in Code Section 17-10-6.1. I know the hour is late, but I think this is a pretty serious matter that we're about to do, because we're basically changing some policy in the state of Georgia. Right now in all 50 states, upon a conviction of a felony, they can collect your DNA. What we're trying to do now, the way the bill was drafted, is if you are arrested for a felony, they can take your cheek swab. What this amendment seeks to do is it basically aligns Georgia code with the U.S. Supreme Court that's already found that if you are arrested for a violent felony, it is not a Fourth Amendment violation under the Constitution to take a DNA swab from the cheek. This was in a 2012 case, Maryland versus King. In that case, Justice Kennedy actually wrote the decision, and you had Chief Justice Roberts, who was appointed by George Bush, Clarence Thomas, Justice Breyer, which was appointed by Clinton, Alito, which was appointed by Bush, all agreeing that a DNA swab after being arrested for a violent felony is constitutional and not a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights. So you can argue all day about the constitutionality of the current bill, but if we go with this amendment, we already know it's been heard and decided by the Supreme Court. So what I'm attempting to do is at least get Georgia in line with what 31 other states are already doing. 31 states are doing this right now. One of the purposes behind this DNA sample upon arrest is, with the progression that we've seen in technology with DNA, it's a great tool for law enforcement. And every law enforcement officer that I've spoken to is in favor of this. There have been cases all across the country, but one in particular that a woman flew in from Texas and talked about how she was brutally raped. And when she was attacked, they put a mask over her, and she was not able to see the person that did it to her at all. And she lived in fear for two to 3 years until finally the person that did that to her was found in a state, in one of these 31 other states where they do take DNA samples upon arrest. They caught him. He was convicted, and now he's serving about 200 years in prison. And it turned out he was a serial rapist. In Texas, where this is implemented, the first year they caught 240. Second year they caught 600. And in 2023 they caught 1,004. So this is a very powerful tool. It protects citizens, and it is constitutional because of the ruling of the Supreme Court in 2012. And Mr. President, I'm happy to yield for any questions. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the well.
All right. Does any other senator wish to speak for or against the measure? All right, so nobody signed up to speak. We'll take up the amendments. On amendment number 1, authored by the senator from the 25th, author of the bill, is there objection to amendment number 1? Without objection, amendment number 1 is added. On amendment number 2, authored by the gentleman from the 50th district, is there objection to amendment number 2? Without objection. All right. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none. The main question is ordered. The question is on the passage of the bill as amended. All those in favor of the bill vote yea. Opposed nay. Vote yea. Vote nay. Opposed nay. Y'all got me all tongue-tied here. Secretary, unlock the machine. Senator from the 19th. All right. On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 44, the nays are 11. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed as amended. All right, last bill of the night, Senate Bill 56. I know, right? I mean, I don't even know if we have to debate this. Why don't we just vote on it? Y'all want to vote on it? Read the caption. Read the caption.
Senate Bill 56 by Senator Anavacharte, the 31st, and others, the bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 1 of Article 5, Chapter 9, and Title 45 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated related to Georgia State Indemnification Fund so as to authorize the Department of Administrative Services to purchase annuities for the payment of identification claims, to provide for qualification standards for indemnification claims relating to certain deaths of public safety officers related to COVID-19, to provide for timely requirements for application of such indemnification claims, to provide for definitions, to provide for conforming changes, to provide for related matters, to provide for an effective date, to repeal conflicting laws, and for other purposes. Mr. President, Senate Committee on Insurance and Labor recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute. Respectfully submitted, Senator Walker, Chairman. Mr. President, Senate Committee on Insurance and Labor offers the following substitute to Senate Bill 56, bill to be entitled an act to amend Part 1 of Article 5, Chapter 9, Title 45 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated related to Georgia State Indemnification Fund so as to authorize the Department of Administrative Services to purchase annuities for the payment of indemnification claims and for other purposes. That completes the order, Mr. President.
Recognize the caucus chair of the majority party, Senator from the 31st.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to be very brief. Okay. In all seriousness, real quick, this bill that you're about to vote on is for fallen public safety and law enforcement officers. Mr. President, I want to thank you, your staff, the senator from the 29th, the senator from the 56th, the senator from the 19th, helping us get the money in the budget, and everyone else who has supported, people like Deputy Barry Henderson in Polk County and the others around the state that have been waiting for funding from their family for their fallen loved ones who died in the line of duty during the pandemic. Vote green on 56. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. Any other senator want to speak for or against it? Chair hears none. Is there objection to the previous question being ordered? Chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Questions on the adoption of the committee substitute. Is there objection to the adoption of the committee substitute? Hearing none, committee substitute is adopted. Is there objection to agreeing to the report of the committee which is favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Is there objection to the main question being ordered? Chair hears none. The main question is ordered. Questions on the passage of the bill by substitute. All those in favor of vote yea. All those nay. Secretary, unlock the machine. I thought you... On the passage of the bill, the yeas are 54, the nays are 1. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed by substitute. Recognize the majority leader.
Yes, sir, Mr. President. I move the stand adjourned until Tuesday, March 4th at 10 a.m.
Majority leader has moved. Secretary, read the announcements.
Mr. President, there are no announcements.
Oh, wow. All right. Majority leader has moved that the Senate stand adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes clearly have it. Be ready for a long day tomorrow. Have a good evening.